My likely atmospheric exposure began in 1954. I was 6 months in my mother's womb, and I'm sure she was spending a lot of time in southern Utah at the time. And the nuclear test was Bravo. It was thermonuclear and the most powerful detonation on record by the United States. That was 1954, when I was 6 months in my mother's womb. We move on to 1962, where 3 cousins, both maternal and fraternal, including myself, were diagnosed with juvenile diabetes. In 1962, which was 1 year before President Kennedy signed the atmospheric above-ground testing ban, the United States at the Nevada test site set off, and this is documented, 89 atmospheric nuclear tests. I'll repeat that, 89 in 1962. Why? Because we were going to have a test ban in 1963. 1962, again, was the year that myself and my 2 cousins were diagnosed with juvenile diabetes. The one that is most profound to me online in 1962 was a test called Sedan Crater. And Sedan Crater, in brief reference, more fallout than any other U.S. nuclear test, exposing greater than 13 million people to radiation. In 1987, Senator John Glenn sponsored myself and 4 other St. George Downwinders to attend the first annual Radiation Victims Conference in New York City. Dr. Joseph Lyons, a University of Utah family practice physician, soon contacted us regarding his research with the effects of radiation to the autoimmune system. Our efforts to procure support for Dr. Lyons' research found no support despite recommendation from several congressional and senatorial Utah delegation members, including Senator Jake Garn. 20 years later, I was a graduate student in public health, and serendipity led me to a publication by Dr. Lyons in the journal Epidemiology. It concluded significant evidence linking non-cancerous thyroid disease to radiation exposure. Deductive reasoning led me back to my experience in 1962, in which 89 atmospheric nuclear tests were detonated. I have survived my other 2 cousins diagnosed that year with juvenile diabetes, that year being 1963. But I did not understand the link connecting my life struggle with vascular strangulation to my legs until viewing the Utah documentary last year at Dixie State University titled Radioactive Veteran. The documentary aired in September 2016, 11 months after my second bypass on my left leg at the University of Utah. My first bypass was performed in St. George. It lasted 8 years, but took 80% of my vision. On September 22nd of 2016, I returned to the University of Utah vascular surgery to learn all my bypasses had failed and my leg was now terminal. My surgical team and I discussed the atomic veteran in the documentary, his battle with his diagnosis of avascular necrosis, now under compensation in the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act. The university is involved in research at the Salt Lake VA Hospital and interjected with me that the veterans also experience a high rate of bypass failure. I conclude this brief history with my sincere gratitude to the physicians and surgeons who have nurtured my victimization for 54 years.
Being a friend of Jamie, she's asked me to read this excerpt from Carol Gallagher's book entitled American Ground Zero, The Secret Nuclear War. And she states, "These are simply the oral histories of the people exposed to the atomic bomb. I hate to see people's lives and deaths reduced to what critics might call only an anecdote. But that was the best that could be done, along with photographing their lives to create a credible document. There will undoubtedly be inevitable scorn of, it's not scientific, as a way to disqualify the very valuable experiences of the victims of testing, which always concerned me greatly. One had to think about how this book would be received by big science and keep the research pristine." And she had a question to John Goffman. "What do you think, as a scientist, a Manhattan Project scientist, about the validity of such a study?" His answer, "Big science won't believe any of it, no matter what. But you don't have to worry about that. You're not expected to do a scientific job. You're trying to get their story of what happened the way they saw it. As I look at the whole situation, I've seen so much that I know is untrue that's stated by officials, and so much cover-up, I honestly don't know if the things I've been working with is really all of it or just a tip of the iceberg. Maybe these people who are telling you these things are closer to the truth than the sanitized stuff I get to see. I honestly don't know how much to trust what's officially reported, even from Japan. I have said on the record that if the Department of Energy impounds data, even if they release it 10 years later, I personally will not believe a damn thing that come out of it, one way or the other. I make my mind up in advance of any studies that come from it. You make up your mind that this is credible material or it isn't. I don't consider the Department of Energy a credible agency. I don't see how you could. For example, from the lies you know they told back in the time when they were called the Atomic Energy Commission. Frankly, Carol, you may be seeing people who are telling you things that are far more important than any of the official rhetoric. Remember, Edmund Blake said, at least a couple of 100 years ago, that all that is necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men do nothing.